And we'll begin. So thank you to our medical librarians who are on the panel today. I put up a title card that includes the evaluation link, but we'll send that out to the attendees directly. But week 12 and week 13 are on the card. System directors, so it'll be regional public library systems and a multi-type director on that panel, and then law libraries. So we're moving from the generic special library term to more specific types of libraries, like today, our medical librarian panelists. So we can go ahead and get started. And let me begin with this first question. And I'll start with Erica, and then Andrew and Susan can also answer. But please introduce yourself. Tell us your current job title and where you work, and tell us how your library fits into your larger organization. Who are your patrons? What kind of relationships you have with other departments in your organization, and a quick description of your library and where it fits into the Minnesota library landscape. So, are you members of library systems, larger library systems than yourself, and do you answer questions from the public? So, Erica.
Yeah, so my name is Erica Ross. I am the Access Services Manager Librarian at Mayo Clinic Plummer Library. So that's right downtown Rochester, big, tall, beautiful building. I've been there for 2 years, and the Mayo Clinic Libraries I think we have 18 libraries across 4 states, and we have different kinds of libraries. We have patient libraries, we have the medical libraries, we have the med school libraries and more. So we've got a lot of that. We have a staff of over 50, and we serve Mayo employees and students and patients, depending on the library. And we have Mayo Clinic in general is 64,000 employees, I think, is where we're at right now. So it's a pretty big operation, but the Plummer Library where I work is the main library. And we mostly serve physicians, nurses, and researchers. And then, yeah, we just, we're not a part of any consortiums. We do interact with Minitex, but that's pretty much it.
Thanks. So Andrew, tell us about your library situation at Allina.
Sure. So I am a knowledge consultant librarian at Allina Health, and we all have our special titles.
I love all the titles we've heard over this.
Yep. We're specifically located in Abbott Northwestern Hospital, which is in Minneapolis. We do have spaces out in our our metro sites, such as Unity, Mercy, and United, but primarily we are centralized at Abbott Northwestern. We are a team of 4 librarians, 1 manager, 2 full-fledged professional librarians, and 1 tech. And we primarily serve the physicians, nurses, allied health personnel across Allina. We are centrally based right off the main lobby at Abbott Northwestern. We do get quite a few patients, but our services are geared towards the caregivers of Allina. We're not part of a consortium per se. We do some interactions with Minitex, and we have our interlibrary loan systems with DocLine, and we have links to other organizations, but not really a consortium per se, similar to Erica's situation. That's it.
Okay, and then Susan.
My name is Susan Schlepper, and I go by Health Science Librarian, and we are located in St. Cloud. So we used to be known as St. Cloud Hospital, but in the last decade or so, we've really been expanding to service central Minnesota. So we sort of have North Dakota and South Dakota on one side, and then the cities on the other, and we sort of inhabit the central part. So we have about 8 hospitals that we work with, mostly rural hospitals. So in Sauk Center and Monticello. We're also aligned with Caris Health, so that they have 2 hospitals in Redwood, one in Redwood Falls and one at Rice Memorial. So in the last 10 years, my base has really expanded. My client base has really expanded, but my position hasn't. So it's been kind of an interesting development, and just figuring out how to service, or how to be available for the physicians and nurses mostly is what I work with, who I work with. And we're not part of a consortium. We do interlibrary loan through Minitex and DocLine as well. But other than that, I have some affiliation with the health science, or the librarian that is part of your consortium in St. Cloud, and have worked with her a little bit, but otherwise we don't really have sort of a real consortium.
I do think before things changed, St. Cloud Hospital was a very active member of Central Minnesota Libraries Exchange.
Yes.
And used them a lot.
We did.
For interlibrary loan. And so
Exactly.
while you may not be using them for interlibrary, I'm sure you're still a member. And I would say that also to Erica and Andrew, that since Metronet is a multi-type, that I think Alina is actually a member of Metronet at some point. And because we don't provide direct services the way some of the other systems do, it's hard to know whether you're a member, but we welcome everyone. And I think that's probably true for Mayo too, that they're a member of SELS, the Southeast Library System, which is housed in the same building as CELCO. That's just my view of the library landscape. So that's interesting. 3 medical librarians with 3 different titles in 3 different types of systems. Now that's always interesting. The titles have been amazing across, all the types of libraries we've had. Some are very specific, and some, are like, who made that title up? One of the school librarians had a title that was like information inventor or something. I mean, where did that come from? So, what happened to media specialist or school librarian? So anyway, it's just interesting to see how the information landscape has developed, and how we as librarians have adapted too, to help people have a sense of what we do. So now we want to know more about you, because this is Real Life Librarianship, and we're nosy and curious about where you went to school, and what path you took along the library road to get where you are today. Was it your initial goal to be a medical librarian? So Andrew?
Sure. Well, my graduate school was St. Catherine's University, or Katie's, St. Kate's in St. Paul. And the previous decade, that was perhaps the only choice. And it might still be the only choice for a brick and mortar school back then. There's many more online options, I'm sure, nowadays. But back then, I remember I was sure I want to go towards an academic pathway. This is an interesting anecdote, but I remember one of my first assignments was to look up job postings in class, and one of the most notable characteristics was you have to have experience. Any experience is key. So I took the first job volunteer option that I possibly could, and it was at Alina Health. It was doing survey volunteering for document delivery, some cataloging on the side. And I was fortunate enough, I would say almost extremely lucky, that they hired me 6 months later as a paraprofessional. From there, I was intrigued by the special librarian track. It was a reciprocal relationship. It was applied knowledge right into my academic coursework and applied knowledge back to my job. So it was a wonderful connection that I made. So I want to say it was a pretty direct path to special librarian or medical librarianship, but not exactly the first thought I was going into as I started my academic career.
Serendipity. There's a comment from Linda Leisha, who's one of our regular attendees, that she worked for Donna Johnson, the former
Oh,
director at
sure.
Alina. She said many, many years ago. And of course, Donna passed away recently.
She was her legacy was monumental. There was a recent article in the Star Tribune written by my manager, Jim Bulger, about Donna Johnson. She was the most pivotal director we've had in a long time, as far as outreach and our services. Many of the older physicians still know her, and she retired in 2002, but her legacy in our organization was monumental.
So did you work for her, or?
No,
oh, so
but I'm
you just benefit from her legacy.
we do, and I'm riding her coattails.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to hear. And
she built the medical library. It was called Media Library Services. Yeah, we were a combined department between library services and media services. I just saw that comment
sure
pop up.
Well, that's great. So, Susan, do you want to tell us your path? Where did you go to school?
Sure. My path is very circuitous, and I was on the 10-year plan for my undergraduate degree. So I actually started my undergrad in Texas, and I was studying international relations. And then I moved up to Wisconsin to help my brother open a restaurant, which I did, and then decided I better go back and get my undergraduate degree. So I went back to the University of Wisconsin and got my undergraduate degree in international relations with an emphasis in Latin American studies. And then just couldn't decide if I was going to go on and get an education degree to teach languages in high school, or go on and get a graduate degree. And I think I made the right choice because I have teenagers, and I don't think I could deal with a classroom full of teenagers, although I love mine. So that's what I did. And along the way, I had a lot of library jobs. So I started an undergraduate, that was my work study job. And I can kind of trace it back to having that job and learning how to catalog, learning how to do copy cataloging. I was able to carry that skill through all of the jobs that I had. And I worked at University of Texas in their main library. I worked at a small reading room at the International Crane Foundation in Baraboo, and just being able to catalog and just being literate in databases really helped so much along the way. So, and then I met my husband and married and moved to St. Cloud, and worked at the University of St. John, or St. John's University, for a couple of years. And then I worked at St. Cloud State for a few years and was building a family. So I really decided I would like to do something that didn't take 50 to 60 hours a week, and was lucky enough to find a part-time position at the hospital. So it's just been kind of a lot of different positions, big libraries, small libraries, special libraries, but I've really enjoyed it.
Did you tell us where you went to library school?
Oh, sorry, no. University of Wisconsin, Madison. Yeah, so I finished my
undergrad. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, Erica, what is your educational path?
So I did my undergraduate degree at Bethel University, right in St. Paul. And I was hired as a student worker in the library there. So I was a reference assistant, and then I was a library technology assistant, and then I was a reference again. And working that job as also being a volunteer at the public library when I was growing up made me decide while I was still in undergrad that I wanted to be in libraries. But in my mind, I was going to be a reference librarian, because that was what I was mainly exposed to. Reference librarian in a college library or in a public library. And And then I graduated from St. Kate's with my MLS, so I'm a Katie as well. And the job I got right out of library school was working at a theological library.
Mm.
And so I was like, maybe I want to be this kind of librarian, you know. But then I ended up getting a job at Bethel University Library, where I was formerly a student worker, and I was the circulation manager there, and I managed like 40 college kids, and I loved what I did, but it didn't qualify as a librarian position. So eventually I took my skills that I learned working in public services, and I just randomly applied for a job at Mayo Clinic for their access services manager, and they took me even though I had no medical background at all. But based on my public services skills, that's how I ended up down here in Rochester.
That's an interesting path.
Yeah.
Going back to your undergrad, your alma mater as a library staff member, and then moving on from there.
Yep.
So now we're going to pretend that you're talking to someone who has absolutely no idea what people in libraries do, or if they do, they think we sit around and read all day, which we know
Yeah.
is
Get
actually
that.
our number one job. No. So if you had to explain your job to someone, which I think some of us are probably in that category even here, what does a medical librarian actually do? You know, so describe your job, Susan.
Okay. Well, usually when somebody asks, I'll say something like, well, I help the nurses and physicians find information. And that really seems to, a light bulb seems to go off, because I think people realize that nurses and physicians need information. They need current information if they're going to practice medicine. So that tends to be my sort of elevator speech about what I do if someone asks me, but there's so much more that goes into it, of course. And I'm a solo librarian, so I do everything from, you know, sticking labels onto books, cataloging, reshelving when a book actually goes out the library anymore, which is very rare, especially these days with COVID. To negotiating contracts with EBSCO and Ovid, and you know, making sure that our online presence is up to date, it's accessible. So it's really a wide variety of things that I do. But I always come back to making sure that I am doing good customer service for the people that I work for, or work with. So the nurses and the physicians. And to make sure that I'm also helping them remember why the library is pertinent and important and relevant. So I'm always trying to, you know, get those moments in when I can to seek out champions and to make sure that the library keeps having relevancy and has at least some kind of profile in the organization.
Okay. So a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Andrew, what would you tell somebody who doesn't know what a librarian does all day?
Sure.
Especially
and
a medical librarian.
yeah, it's an awfully good question. And in all honesty, it keeps changing. I try to make it that old saying where if you can tell, if you can explain it to your grandmother, then you're on the right track. So I try to explain it. My job is to make providers' lives a little easier, save them time, and I try and help them provide the exceptional care with the best evidence from medical literature. So, and a little longer elevator speech, I help answer reference with clinical, scientific research questions for healthcare professionals so they can make evidence-based decisions. I know there's a little bit more to that if they were to sit down with me, but at the risk of sounding perhaps a little cliche or even more cryptic. I think that'll do for now.
Okay, you might have to explain some of those terms to a
Oh, yeah.
novice person, evidence-based
It keeps
medicine,
changing.
all that.
Indeed.
So, but I'm always happy to live in a community that has medical librarians, so that I know my providers have access to the information that they need. And that would come down to Erica with access in her title. How would you explain your job, Erica?
Yeah, so I am like a circulation and interlibrary loan manager. So I manage the staff that do all the circulation, the desk coverage, all the customer service based stuff. And I do a lot of, my job specifically is to support that staff, and I do a lot of the troubleshooting, a lot of completing citations that physicians or their assistants or nurses and researchers submit into our document delivery system. And then my team either ends up scanning hundreds of articles for these patrons, or we do interlibrary loan. So we're doing that constantly. We don't do as much checkout of physical items because so much of our collection is actually in print, but people want the scans. So we do spend a lot of time scanning. We help a lot of the med students too. I specifically do that, but we have 4 other reference librarians who spend their entire time doing systematic reviews, which I learned is a massive search result of a specific topic, and they want every single thing ever published on that topic. And so my team is responsible. I've never done one, but that's what they do. And my team is the one that fulfills those requests. So when someone requests something, it's hardly ever just one item, one article. It's usually 300 at a time. So we work with massive, one person. Yeah, it'll be a massive request. So that's what I do. That wasn't an elevator.
300 for one person is kind of overwhelming.
It's pretty typical for us.
Really?
It's mostly researchers that are submitting it. They're doing a research study on this topic, and they want every single thing ever published.
So the library is doing their literature review for them, basically. And how did the reference? I'm curious how you know when you reach the end, or how the reference librarians know when they reach the end. You know,
they keep running the search. They set up.
Okay. So
yeah,
I'm
sorry, it's out of my element.
That's okay.
They set it up in the databases and continue to run the searches.
Wow.
Systematically. Yeah.
So Lynn had a question, and Andrew seems to be answering it in the chat about a surgeon who called, who had found something and he hadn't seen before. They hadn't seen before. Do a search and read it to me. Is that?
Whoa, wait. Oh, read it to me. Oh, I misrepresented that. There was a classic case I remember of someone who said there's an article that was recently published and they were reading it to them over the phone while surgery was being conducted. I don't think that has ever happened to me. I've
heard stories like that before, but I've never experienced that yet.
There's been instances where we have had an impact on somebody. We've impacted patient care, where we've impacted the organization, but I don't think I've ever had it where we read it to somebody. But certainly the occasion happens where if they request an article, they of course want more articles, or they want a literature search of as Erica said, they want everything.
They want everything. Yeah, sometimes it's an emergency request, and that was a big difference for me in moving to a medical library, because emergency meant like drop everything you do and do it now. So that's what we do. Like someone needs the article now. So life or death.
Interesting. Makes you think about having surgery.
State-of-the-art surgery.
State-of-the-art surgery. I have had both my knees replaced in the last 3 months. and I think they could probably do it with their eyes closed.
Mhm.
So, but there was a difference because the anesthesiologist at the second one said to me, "We have reviewed all the new research." And I thought, well, that's good.
That's
Mhm.
key.
So, because they changed the anesthesia procedure for the second knee
Mhm.
for the better, I hope. But anyway, I don't think he was reading it during the procedure. He seemed to have all the information lined up when he
Yeah.
spoke to me. So anyway, so we've heard from each of you about that. And now let's move on to talk about real basics. What are the minimum qualifications for this job? And you don't have to tell us your salary, but if you had a ballpark idea of what medical librarians, beginning medical librarians might have as their salary, that would be interesting to us in the audience. But really, what are the minimum qualifications? You don't have to be an MD or a RN, do you?
No.
Erica's shaking her head.
Nope.
So let's, Erica, go ahead and tell us what the minimum qualifications. You said you had no medical background when you went to Mayo.
No medical background. You just for the librarian positions, you have to have an MLIS or MLS master's, and then there's some credentialing if you're encouraged to pursue. But other than that, for my position specifically, they were most interested in the public services background. Experience in libraries, experience in medical libraries was preferred, but it's not absolutely necessary. So for my position
For
specifically.
your position. Okay. Do you have any idea what a beginning librarian at Mayo?
Yeah, so there's 6 levels of librarians at Mayo, and librarian 1 starts between 45 and 50,000 a year.
Okay, thanks. So Susan,
Mhm.
what are the
Um,
minimum qualifications for a job like yours?
Yeah, so MLIS or MLS, they do prefer familiarity with medical and nursing databases and indexes, just knowing how to navigate the literature. It wasn't necessary for my job, but that was preferred. They like, communication skills, both verbal and writing. That was also part of the sort of the minimal. And also for the position that I applied for, at that time, St. Cloud Hospital was going through its magnet designation. And I had some teaching and instruction experience, and I think that was one reason why I got the job, because they wanted me to come in and start teaching the nurses how to do how to find evidence-based information, how to evaluate it. And because they were really trying to push their nurses to start doing research and start reading and writing, because it helped the case for magnet designation. So it
What does
wasn't
that mean?
magnet designation. Magnet is an organization that comes to different hospitals, and it's specifically to the nursing organization within your hospital, or the nurses within your hospital. You have to meet a certain criteria in different levels, like doing research, disseminating research, bedside care, clinic. There's certain clinical levels that you have to attain, and then your designated magnet, and then that's usually a draw. If you can say we're a magnet hospital, nurses know that they can have agency in the way they practice. And so it's kind of a PR thing, but it's backed up with a lot of work that the nurses have to do to get that designation. So when I said that I had instruction and teaching experience, they really were interested in that. And I find that it helps, because even if you're teaching at some level, even if it's one-to-one, it's good to have some instruction experience, I think. And then the salary, I would say, I looked on MLA and it looks like the average is around 66,000, and we kind of come in there. It's probably a range. I honestly don't know what the specific range is for
Sure.
us, but I'd say 25 to 35 an hour, and I am hourly. I'm not a
Oh,
salary
hourly.
position. Yeah. Yep.
That's an interesting question we could ask.
Yeah.
Are you hourly or are you
Yeah,
salary?
it kind of makes a difference. It
Yeah, I'm
does.
It
hourly
does make
too.
a difference.
Yes.
You're hourly too?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm
That's a-
salaried, but
That surprises me.
I'm hourly, but the reference librarians are salary.
Why is there a difference, I wonder?
Yep. I don't know.
I don't
Mayo.
Mayo.
a different beast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Erica, there's a compliment for the Mayo Library in the chat too, that someone's, when her mother was there, had an extremely rare disease and felt that the medical library at Mayo was extremely helpful. So that's nice that we all
Good
have
to
our
hear, yeah.
own experiences. And so now I think, Andrew, it's your turn to tell us about minimum requirements or qualifications and starting salaries.
Sure. Well, I'm I'm going to echo Susan and Erica's. We all have we require the usual basics, master's degree in library science from an ALA accredited university.
Mhm.
The minimum experience waivers roughly between 1 and 3 years in reference services, database searching. And Erica mentioned credentialing with AHIP, or that is the Academy of Health Information Professionals. That's not required by us. It's encouraged, but it's not
Highly encouraged, yeah.
required for us. We most of the requirements we take are reference based. So the majority of our responsibilities are tailored based reference services. We take on a project and look up everything there is about it and hand it to them. And it requires synthesizing a lot of evidence. We also have requirements for hard skills such as computer, database skills, and we require a good amount of soft skills. We're being the face of our library, so it requires interacting a lot over the phone, by email, or in person with physicians and teams, in leading in meetings as well. See, the last question you had was about starting salary, and we are, let's see, our paraprofessionals or our techs are hourly, but as librarians, professional librarians, we are salaried. And we have about 3 tiers: associate, intermediate, and senior. But I believe it's very similar to what Susan and Erica said. Between 50 and 60 a year is roughly where we fall in, but it depends highly on experience.
So it's not like a public where it's unionized, public library where it would be unionized, and it doesn't matter what level of experience if you're applying for this job.
Right.
So they do take your qualifications into consideration. So that's good to know. So one of the questions was, are you the only librarian at your library? But we've already heard that Susan is the only one. Andrew has colleagues, 4 or 5 colleagues, and Erica is in a large organization.
Yeah,
So,
at the library that I'm at I have like 10 support staff, and then probably 20 people working at the library I'm at, and then it's 50 across the states and in all of our libraries, 50 plus.
So that's a good question then, Erica. We'll begin with you, which is, are the job duties collaborative? We know you have an area of specialization, circulation, and interlibrary loan, but across those other Mayo libraries, not just in Rochester, but in the other locations, do you have contact or collaboration with the library staff in those locations?
Yeah, I interact a lot with the library staff from all of our locations. We have to communicate frequently, and make sure like our policies are the same, and that we do a lot of mailing of print material between each other. But there's not, it's getting more collaborative as time goes on, especially now with COVID and more teleworking, it doesn't matter where you are. So that's definitely grown more. But within our libraries, it's pretty technical services stays in technical services, public services stays in public services. You have to be really intentional if you want to overlap with each other.
So, and then Susan, you're collaborating with people outside your, I mean, I'm sure there's collaboration within your organization too, but how would you describe that?
Yeah, well, I should say that there is one support staff. So I am more or less
That's helpful.
0.6 FTE, and then the support staff person is more or less 0.4 FTE. So we almost make
0.4.
one full-time person. And we do collaborate. Her title is library, well, I guess it's librarian now, because she does have her MLIS. And I sort of think, I sort of feel like I'm grooming her to be the next librarian.
Sure.
So she works part-time in the library, but she also works part-time in the education department. So it's kind of a good fit for her right now, because she's kind of learning the ropes. Because I manage the library, I make all the day-to-day decisions, I make all the collection development decisions, but she's sort of involved in seeing how it all works. And so collaborating, I mean, I really do, most of the people I collaborate with are within the organization are nurses. We do have an archivist. And actually he and I find that we can collaborate on certain things. We initiated an institutional repository that he and I are collaborating on, because he's populating it with a lot of the history of the organization, and I'm trying to populate it with all of the research that's happening. So, and then I try to touch base with through the Health Science Library of Minnesota. I'll shout out for that, HSLM.
Hey.
Yeah, with my cohort. That's kind of who I figure are my real colleagues. And if I do if I'm stumped or if I can't figure something else, I certainly do reach out to them. So
great. You want to step in there, Andrew?
Sure. For day-to-day issues, my colleagues and I do collaborate. New requests, decisions for new resources, vendor-related issues, addressing technical problems. But it's fair to say the majority of our work comes independently, and we're out seeking out, developing new relationships, building connections across our departments across Alina. We have about 12 regional hospitals. I'm sorry, four metro hospitals, 12 regional hospitals, and 90 plus clinics. And we want to build connections. It's about who do you know and who do you know that you know. And my specialty to build connections resides in a lot of various departments, from orthopedics, anesthesia, primary care, and clinical practice councils. So it's fair to say that we have our work between my colleagues, but a good amount of work comes outside of the library.
Okay. That offers many opportunities, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the specialized databases that you use in your job, and the specialized terminology? Nursing being one, obviously. And did you have these skills before you were hired, or did you have to pick it up on the job? So Andrew, do you want to begin?
So the question was, do we have specialized degrees?
What are they? Specialized databases?
Oh, sure. No, we have our share of point of care databases, Micromedics, UpToDate. and those go across the crux of up to date is it's getting more and more expensive, but a lot of
Sure.
these resources are embedded in the EMR, or the electronic medical records databases such as Epic. Day-to-day literature searches, we primarily use Medline databases, which I'm sorry to say I had no experience coming in before working at a medical library. PubMed and Ovid, as well as CINAHL, are our bread and butter. We use those to answer most of our clinical questions, looking for the best evidence, clinical practice guidelines, or randomized controlled trials. Those are the things that most of our providers seem to be wanting to make decisions. It would have been perhaps helpful in school to know of those databases, but there was more learning on the go. In fact, a lot of these databases do change frequently enough. So what I probably learned back then would have been helpful, but not exactly all necessary. So.
And what about the specialized terminology? Did you have that at your fingertips? Maybe not.
Specialized terminology. I did take some medical terminology courses, and that was very, very helpful.
At St. Kate's?
At St. Kate's, I took anatomy and physiology courses. That was very, very helpful, but I would say a lot of feedback that I've been getting from a lot of providers for the most valuable learning opportunities. So feedback from work was probably the most valuable. Then again, I'm going to go back and say medical terminology was extremely important to just know what I'm searching for and find out it was right, because it is another language.
Mhm.
I know. How do you spell that again?
I still need to ask that.
Yeah.
Susan, would you say your experience is similar or different than Andrew's with the databases and terminology that's used in your job?
Yeah, I'd say very similar. And I work in PubMed. Well, a lot of what I do is have PubMed on one screen and CINAHL on another. And I've noticed there's a lot of crossing in the disciplines. So medical and nursing used to be more distinct, but now there's, I think, because there's been a lot of encouragement to work in teams, multidisciplinary teams, there's more crossing over in the literature now. So when a nurse asks me to do a search, I will always go to the medical databases as well. And what I've learned is that PubMed has some great tutorials, and they have some classes that you can take.
Oh, yes.
So I've just kind of taken advantage of those, and those are really good to not only learn new things, but also to help me realize that I'm doing it the right way, and I'm looking in the right places. So yeah.
So what is the CINAHL database? How do you spell that?
CINAHL, it's the Cumulative Index of Nursing and Allied Health Index. So it's all nursing, occupational therapy, physical therapy. It's all the literature.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
EBSCO owns it.
EBSCO, of course. Who else? I mean, we do have some versions of Medline, something through Elm,
Yeah.
but I always like to learn these new things so I can ask my doctor, well, did you check that in?
That keeps him on his toes.
Test them,
Keep them on their toes.
Yeah.
So Erica, you already told us you had no medical terminology in your background. What databases are you using?
So even though I don't know what I am searching for, like I don't know what it's about, I use PubMed every day for almost every citation that's submitted to verify it. Embase I use to find all the obscure abstracts to confirm the citations. That's mostly what I'm doing. And then let's see, yeah, the reference librarians heavily use Ovid. So but PubMed is my.
And I don't know what Ovid is either.
He also
medical
uses,
data.
oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
It's Medline as well. That's the old way of saying the search engine that uses PubMed.
Okay,
I guess that's the long way of describing it.
Yeah.
okay.
And then, yeah, medical terminology. I've taken some free medical terminology classes and studied terms when I first started, but I do a lot of pulling up Google and typing in what people are saying, and then it autocorrects my spelling, and then I move forward. So there's a lot of that.
Oh, all those librarian tricks
Yeah. So, yeah.
that we, can teach our users as well as our colleagues.
Yeah, I gotta say, I use Google every day.
Yeah.
You're here.
Oh, sure.
Here, here.
Yep.
I do not discourage that one little bit,
Mm-mm.
in
I
conjunction.
mean, I'm a terrible speller of normal English words, so I use Google to save me anyways, but it really
Yeah.
does help because it knows what I'm talking about.
Well, it's the same concept sort of as Wikipedia. We know Wikipedia can give us some background or give us some search words, whether they're correct for medical searching, I'm not sure. But for other areas, sure, you can use those more consumer-friendly, consumer-oriented, made-up databases like Wikipedia. But
Yeah,
then
like the
move on.
spelling is more forgiving than if you
Right.
type something into the catalog incorrectly, it
type
just
in-
doesn't
or-
exist.
Yeah, or
Right.
type it
Yeah.
into any EBSCO database. It's like,
Yep.
really, just correct the spelling. Google can do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is, probably a kind of a wild question because we've all worked in libraries and we know there's no typical day, but what is a typical day for you? Erica?
A typical day for me is I really do a lot of troubleshooting with my staff. I work on all of the requests that have been submitted that they are unable to confirm the citation. And so I spend a lot of my time going through the more challenging citations, filling those. And then because of COVID, it's been weird, but I will cover the circ desk and then I'll scan a couple dozen articles. And then sometimes I have to run out to our warehouse, which has some of our off-site collection, and I'll fill in with scanning over there, and then I'll be on the phone with some of my staff with technical issues, taking control of their computer and making it do what they need it to do. So that's my typical day, is running around like crazy.
And doing the nitty gritty.
Yeah, both the nitty gritty and the really detail oriented stuff too.
So Andrew, do you have a typical day?
Sure, it's not as on my feet, or it's not as putting out small fires. Actually, mine's a little bit more boring. My typical day involves working through 2, maybe 3 literature searches, which involves constantly, constantly tweaking the searches, extra Boolean operators, adding truncation, filters where necessary, and that involves searching through hundreds of results and picking out the best articles, combining them, and then putting together a quick summary of what we found and perhaps commenting on the quality as well as quantity of the available evidence, if possible. The other part, besides literature searching, is keeping up with what's going on with our organization. We want to make sure we can be of service to everything that's out there, whether that be the turnover of personnel, technology, policies, or other news. The internal news with the pandemic, at least recently, was enough to clutter up my inbox. But certainly the new news is about vaccine distribution, where 90% of the providers are now vaccinated. So we're great for that.
That's good.
When we want to stay on top of what's coming out with new resources, new ebooks, pricing changes for journals, statistics to monitor copyright. Not as fun and exciting, but necessary library internal news. And we want to stay in touch with our greater community. What's going on with Midwest Midwest Medical Library Association, the Medical Library Association, HASLM, what new classes, learning opportunities are available. So we try to space out between what's going on with our work centralized and then slowly branch off throughout the day. Okay, what's going on outside these walls here?
Well, so with the tragedy yesterday in St. Cloud, how did that affect your work? I mean, did you get, or do you anticipate that you will not get questions about why are these crimes committed? We can't answer that, but providing information for support staff, to support staff, or
not directly, I'm afraid.
Okay.
No. Most of the news or the internal news have been from our leaders. We just got a leader from our interim chief medical officer. This is the most horrible, tragic moment, as one provider was killed and 4 were injured, and there's been it feels like more of a generic letter of support, but certainly was a tragedy
right.
nevertheless. But
an
it doesn't.
atypical day for everyone. We
Absolutely.
hope.
Yeah.
So Susan, you have a typical day, atypical day?
No.
I don't have any days.
Every day is a little different, but I do start with email. I mean, that's
Sure.
probably the typical day for everybody, because that's where I will go and find a lot of lit searches that have been requested and article requests. So I try to knock some of those out before I move on, and I try to triage those, so the things that I know need to get out soon will get out, and then it could be, like Andrew said, just looking at statistics, making sure our collection is where it needs to be, troubleshooting, like Erica said, troubleshooting access issues. When I used to be in a physical space, we would also troubleshoot computer issues and printer issues. So it really is sort of soup to nuts kind of thing that I do. So I actually like that I don't really have a typical day. That kind of fits the way I like to work. So
That's handy.
yeah.
So we've talked a little bit on and off about the pandemic and how it's affected jobs, and how has it specifically affected you in your job or in your workspace? I don't think Erica's in her Mayo workspace.
Nope.
Doesn't look like Susan or Andrew are either, but how has the pandemic impacted you? Is your library open? Is it open to library users or only to staff? And how have things changed, and how easy has it been? I know it hasn't been easy, but what were the challenges and how have you overcome those challenges? And what do you see remaining in place after the pandemic? So Erica?
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit, we closed immediately, literally kicked people out, and we're like, we're closed now, but you have to leave. We used to be open 90 hours a week.
Wow.
Yeah, 7 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night most days.
The library was open from 7 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, and
yeah,
staffed with librarians?
Yeah,
like an academic library.
It was very similar to a college library. Yeah. Yep. Right. And so we teleworked for a month and a half, and that was interesting to get my staff comfortable with the technology. A lot of my staff have been at this library for their entire career, decades, close to retirement. And so the idea of teleworking was really overwhelming. And so just getting used to that groove was shocking in the beginning for them. And then we started going back in teams. We alternate. So I work with the same 2 people on site. And then when we telework, a second team. We split up into 2 groups, so we're alternating. So if my team got exposed to COVID, then it wouldn't affect the entire team, you know, kind of deal. So we alternated. So some days here, sometimes there. We worked while the library remained closed. We kept scanning articles and delivering documents that way. And then we reopened to our patrons the beginning of August. And we are normally a 3-floor library, and we only have 1 floor open. And we've cut down our computers that are accessible so that they're spaced out. So we used to have like 35 computers. Now we have 20 accessible. And our hours are a lot shorter. We're like 8 to 6 now. But we are planning in March to open back up to our hours that we had previously.
With all the staff in place in the library?
Just the circulation and interlibrary loan staff. The reference librarians are going to continue working from home or continue teleworking. Tech services was doing the same thing as my team was, alternating who was on site and who was teleworking. It was a lot more difficult for them carrying suitcases of materials with them.
Opening the
Rolling
mail.
suitcases, yeah. Yeah, so it was challenging in the beginning. I think we're finally in a comfortable routine, and now we're going back. So
Now you're going
it's gonna
back.
be shocking again, but we're making it work.
So do you think any of the changes, working at home, or obviously the catalogers are probably never want to work at home again,
Yeah.
but
I
the reference librarians or some of the other staff might
I think
appreciate
reference and management will continue to do teleworking. We'll see. Access services kind of has to be there to run the show, and as we extend our hours, our teleworking option kind of dissolves because we run kind of thin staffing wise if we need to cover that. So we'll see. Maybe it's no more snow days like the poor kids are experiencing now.
No more
we can
snow
telework
days.
instead. Yeah.
Well, snow days, but you're allowed to have a sick day, right?
Yeah. Hopefully people take sick days. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Especially during this time, like
Especially
can't even
now.
cough or sneeze without being looked at. So
I know when it first started, my daughter lives in Chicago and commutes by bus and L, and she said, don't sneeze because everybody gives you, and this was pre-mask, obviously.
Oh yeah.
So, witnessing some unpleasant scenes on public transportation.
Yeah.
So how has the pandemic affected you, Andrew, or your library?
Well, sure. Like Erica, we also closed immediately. I remember March 17th, they announced we're out, kicked everybody out, and our library was actually turned into a command center. They moved in conference room.
Command center.
It was the decision-making center for how to distribute sanitation supplies, PPE, as well as making sure everyone has support that they need. So it was a really interesting thing. We couldn't access our library for at least 4 months. But the change for us was rather seamless working remotely. We've been doing it off and on for years, so that has really helped.
That helps.
Team meetings are still technically glitchy since some of my colleagues have a little internet connections that are wavering. But our workload and responsibilities never really changed, except the less face-to-face contacts kind of put the establishing of and developing of new connections on pause for a while. That in turn has affected the amount of work that has come in. The biggest change for us, besides working remotely, the requests that came in were more at first COVID related. The onset of the pandemic was finding the best evidence to spare personalized protective equipment. What's the best evidence to sanitize environments, the efficacy of masks within certain environments. And then later on, we noticed it was a different change, how to manage the care of patients who have these symptoms, or what's the mortality risk here, and what's the best way to mitigate intubation. And so it was an okay change for us. I love working from home personally. There's a lot benefits to it. I don't have to ride the bus, even though I love riding the bus. We are planning to go back to our library in more face-to-face, but there's no set time limit yet. It depends upon our directors and our management. That's not exactly clear. We do maintain the space. I go in once a week just to check it up and make sure the computers are operating the way they should. And there is badge access for our doors. All they have to do is come in and use a PC if they want to chart or look up something on their own. But they've been very good. I needed to put extra signage to say, hey, make sure you socially distance, wear your mask.
So many signs, yeah.
Yep, be socially
So many
responsible.
So
Yep.
many signs.
Don't forget to sanitize that computer when you're done.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And this is how you do it. Don't just spray that stuff on the keyboard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if I had the choice, I would rather perhaps work from home. But at the same time, I really miss the contact with my colleagues and the patients or the providers that we serve. So I go back and forth on how should we do this forward.
It's sort of a hybrid, if you were, so did you work at home at all before, or were you always at the library at Abbott?
We were always at the library at Abbott, but we had all the tools necessary to work remotely. We had our own laptops and PCs that we could easily take home, and it felt almost like flipping a switch for us.
I think that sounds different than a whole lot of other places.
Maybe I'm romanticizing it.
Well, I think just the portability of your equipment, for one thing, I mean, that is in the modern era of everything being online or accessed. However, not everybody has that equipment of their own at home.
Sure. There was,
and as you say, unstable internet.
That was a little here. Those were little problems, but thankfully they're becoming fewer and further in between. There weren't too many resources on site that we needed to do our job. My manager, on the other hand, he's a bit old school with the paper files, and he absolutely needs them to coordinate with the vendors. So I feel for him. Jim needs to be back at his desk every so often. But the rest of us, I think we're okay.
We had this, Olivia and I were having this conversation too, because we closed the same week everybody else did and moved home, and now we're paying for very expensive office storage space at 1619 Dayton. But when she told me today she couldn't do the moderation, and I'm thinking, oh, great, one extra screen. How do I manage these questions? Well, over the weekend, I managed to get an old printer hooked up so I could print them. But I said to her, I haven't needed to print anything since March.
Yep.
I mean, what we use in our office, we share some equipment with Melissa, including a big photocopier scanner. That's what we use. And what Olivia goes in once a month to scan the bills to the accountant, and if we changed the address on the bill, she could do that from home if she had a scanner. So I think some of those things where you start realizing, okay, we're paying however many thousands of dollars a month for this space. Do we really need it? Even before the pandemic, because we're just a small office of 3 people, thinking, yeah, we could work from our cars. We could park in the parking lot at the public library and use their internet, and it would be fine, So and I think that's to some extent true for MELSA too, even though they have a larger staff. and have a whole lot more stuff to store. That's where we face the problem. What do you do with all that? Those records were required by law to keep until the end of time. You know, put them in boxes at U-Haul storage because who cares? You know, we haven't looked at them. So Susan, how has your life changed in the pandemic? The hospitals don't close, I understand.
Right. No. Well, it's kind of funny because I remember, getting the email, okay, everybody go home for the next 2 weeks and then we'll
Yeah, 2
reassess.
weeks.
2 weeks, right?
So here we are, 12 months later, still waiting. And it looks like we've been asked to continue to work from home through June. So I already know that it's going to be at least beyond June before we go back. And it was a little bit of a, it took me a while because I have kids and all of them were also doing their schooling from home. So we were jockeying for prize positions in the house. And so I ended up, and we have sort of an open concept, kitchen, living, dining area. And that's where I ended up. And so there you might hear some interesting things. I'm in my bedroom right now, but I've had some interesting dog sounds and kid sounds on some of my meetings. But we at the library where we are, we have a service desk, and I think my former supervisor, I think it was real hard for her to let go of a physical space that we had to be there at the service desk, because I would bring up the possibility of teleworking, and I think she had some notion that if people didn't see me, they wouldn't realize that there was a librarian and then we needed a librarian. But I think this last year has really, I mean, it's proven that I don't have to be there.
You could have a cutout just like they do at the Twin.
Yeah, exactly. And so much of what I did when I was sitting at that service desk was, where is health information? Because it was down the hall from us, and they always thought the library was where they got their records, and I would just have to redirect them, or other things that someone else, like a volunteer could do, So and I would always, the way the service desk is, you can see people walk in, and I always feel like I had to make eye contact with people because I wanted to, welcome them into the space. And so I'd be working and I would have to do that. And, when you have to do that 50 times a day,
interrupted.
it kind of, cuts into your productivity. So, so this has been really good. There were some equipment issues, and that took a few weeks to get it all figured out, but eventually I got my setup, and it looks very much like what I have in the library. And I do go back there probably once every 2 weeks or so just to check the mail, make sure there's still paper in the printers, and stuff like that. But it's been a fairly easy transition, and I can easily see us going to something hybrid, so that I'm not in the library all the hours that I work, but I'm working from home some days and there some days.
I think in some ways in libraries too, as you were saying, Susan, that out of sight, out of mind. But as the pandemic has proven, you can be out of sight and still provide everything that people need. It's setting up some of those systems to make it easy and transparent for users who think, well, I always had to go to the library to ask this question, and now through other means to be able to transmit their requirements or their needs and then get them back, that could be interesting. I think it will be interesting to see how all libraries change. Public libraries, because of their presence in the community as notable buildings, and being providers of more than information in some ways, their community spaces and programming in particular. But even that's moved online. I hear through the grapevine that the legacy programming that's been done online through the public libraries has more attendance than it ever did.
Mhm.
And we find that to be true for us too. You know, if we got 8 or 10 people at a face-to-face wind down, we thought, yay, this is a big success. And some of these have had as many as 70 or 80 people. Olivia did a webinar on Google Chrome extensions that had over 100 people register.
Wow.
That would never happen.
Mhm.
And the other advantage, obviously, is we can have people from St. Cloud who don't have to drive to the Twin Cities to be on a panel.
Right.
One of the panels for special libraries, we had a librarian from NASA, which is, I think, in
Wow.
Bethesda,
That's
Maryland.
cool.
Cool.
It was very
Wow.
cool. Somebody Olivia knew from library school. And let me say, she makes more money than all of us put together.
I'm sure. Government job. I'm sure.
She earns it. Yeah.
Yeah, those federal salaries.
Yeah.
I worked in
Oh, yeah.
Washington, D.C. before we moved here. And I wasn't really planning on being a librarian, but I looked at the salaries and I'm thinking, are these jobs part-time? Because the salaries are so different from the Washington, D.C. metro area at that time, and probably still, than they were here. It's like, really? Noticeable. So let's talk about why your jobs are great. What is the best thing about your job? And then, of course, there's another side to that coin. What is the worst thing about your job? You want to begin, Andrew?
Sure. You know, more and more, it's wonderful when we see the impact that our work has on our greater organization, especially if we hear that it impacts patient care. There have been few, but there have been certain instances where it said I have saved someone's life.
Wow.
It happens very, very rarely, but when it does, there's not a better feeling in the world when that happens. There have been instances I've gotten back where I have been said this information will save the organization tens of thousands of dollars. Like, really? That's I'm just passing this along, but thank you.
Mhm.
More than passing it along. Didn't you find it?
You're
Yes,
welcome.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So the impact can be absolutely huge. The
It's exciting.
yeah, the other side, I wouldn't say this is necessarily a bad thing. The jobs can be a little boring. And just being honest with that. There are worse things than being bored on your job, but I'm grateful that we still are employed amidst everything that else going on. So I'm actually, in a way, very, very grateful to be bored. We could be outsourced or furloughed, or even worse, we could be let go. But I don't have a fear of that happening in the meantime, or even in the near future, based upon what's going on out there. I think we're okay. So I'm looking at it saying I'm humbled and I'm grateful to have a job, and I'm okay to being bored here at home with a job. So
Okay, so I don't know. Can you top that, Erica? Saving someone's life is the best part of
Well,
your job.
I'm sure I did at some
I'm sure you have
point,
too. It's
but for
following
me,
that chain back.
yeah. For me, it's definitely the most rewarding is working with the physicians and the researchers and the nurses, and just so grateful when we find something. I'm like, well, that's my job. I'm here to make your life easier. And they're just so thankful. And it's just really nice to support them. And especially during this pandemic, it's hard not to get like emotional about it. But anyway, we can make their life easier. And that's very rewarding. The hardest part about my job, honestly, working in such a big organization, is the hierarchy structure is something I've had to get used to. I came from a small college library where it was pretty flat, and this is ideas and approval processes move very, very slowly.
Interesting.
And that's definitely the thing that gets me. It's so hard. So,
I suppose that makes sense. Mayo's relatively conservative, I think, in a lot of its ideas, and it is huge. So it is
huge. It's
even
huge.
dealing with a library within a large organization.
Yeah, everything needs to be approved. It's
And approved
hard and a
again.
slow process. Yes, yes.
Okay, I could see that that would be the reverse coin of helping people
Yeah.
do their jobs better. Susan.
I'd agree. Just helping people do their job better. And I've had, I've sent results to nurses, and they'll say, I could have never found this. I don't know where you found it, because I looked for an hour and I couldn't find anything. So whenever I do any kind of instructional classes, I'll say, you're not going to remember how to search in this database.
Right.
You're not going to remember how to find full text journals, but remember that I'm here, and remember that, I'm here to help you. So that's really the most gratifying and the funnest part, I think. For me, I mean, this may sound sort of granular, but I don't really enjoy collection development. It's really hard.
Really?
I think
Oh.
if I had a really good grasp on it, because we're a small library, but we service so many specialties. We we have family practice, we have OB-GYN, we have intensive care, we have all the disciplines that I have to try to figure out, okay, what does everybody need? So just trying to figure out different tactics, different inroads into the statistics, like, should I look at what we're using? Should I look at how many turnaways we've had? How should I put this information together to make sure that I'm getting the best stuff, biggest bang for the buck, basically. So that's probably the thing that I struggle the most with. Yeah.
Well, I could see that. But what kind of budget do you have for collection development? Adequate? Inadequate?
No, never quite adequate. And the way our budget is now, I used to have a discrete budget, but I don't anymore.
Oh,
Sort of
okay.
As we need it, we request it, and so that's been hard to get used to also.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So medical librarianship's fairly specialized, I would think, but what kind of professional organizations are out there that provide support to you that you belong to or know about or have participated in, and what do they bring to you in your job? So who wants to answer that question? You've thrown some acronyms around. So Andrew, tell us about HSLM.
Sure,
or
sure.
whatever.
No, that's good. No, thank you for remembering. So HSLM is the Health Science Libraries of Minnesota. We are a small team. We have about 25 members across the state. Sometimes we get lucky, and we get some students, and we get some people from other states. Not too often. We usually are a pretty, I don't want to say we're a pretty small team, because the actual board is comprised of about 6 members in total. And a few roles are turned over every year, but most of them we just keep on having the same people year after year. It's a little easier, but we put on special programming, sometimes related to the health sciences. But this year has been very different because of the recent social unrest in the Twin Cities, as well as across the country. So we put on some special programming related to social justice. In particular, we formed a book club. We selected 2 books, and we read it and we discussed them. And I think it was very, very useful for a Zoom meeting such as that. Usually we get speakers about this, and we are planning to about health sciences, but this hopefully this year we'll get some speakers that can talk about diversity issues, equity, and social justice that are very hot topics right now. But we try and keep an eye on what's going on at a higher level, including the Midwest chapter of the Medical Library Association, and occasionally the Medical Library Association. We feel better, at least I feel a little better working in a smaller pond such as Haslam or the Health Science Libraries of Minnesota. That's the nutshell of it.
Okay. What about you, Eric? Are there other organizations that you know of or belong to?
Yeah, as someone who's new to this field, I came from participating in the Minnesota Library Association, so MLA. And then when I moved to medical libraries, they're like, you need to join MLA. And I was like, what? I'm already, and it's the Medical Library Association. So that's the national one. And so I'm a part of that. And then I've been a member of HSLM, but didn't do anything with it until this year. I joined the book club. So that was pretty fun. I met these two the first time there. This is my second time seeing your guys' face. So that's how I've heard of them. But that was a pretty exciting time. And I wouldn't have been able to do if we didn't have Zoom. So that was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And then I do a lot of stuff with MLA, or participate in do a lot of webinars, or attend a lot of webinars and that kind of stuff with the Medical Library Association for the credentialing of AHIP, that kind of stuff. So, and then very few things with American Library Association. So.
Okay. Susan, are there other professional associations or organizations?
Well, I think we mentioned all of them. I guess I feel like Andrew in that I feel a little more comfortable hanging out with HSLM or the Midwest chapter. And I used to go to MLA, the Medical Library Association conferences, but what I found was that it was really frustrating to go to presentations and realize that I didn't have the staffing to do these great things that they were doing. But I could go to the regional, I could go to the Midwest chapter, and there were a lot more people sort of like me in a small library setting, and I could actually find things that I could apply to my library. And the same with HSLM. I mean, it's a bunch of us who are who have ideas, and so that's one reason why I like to go to these smaller, and it's not as far to travel usually. So
no travel now.
Yeah.
So would you recommend student membership in any of these, or
Definitely.
membership in general?
Definitely.
To anybody?
Yeah. Especially if there are any students who are thinking about medical library becoming a member of HSLM, because I think you could talk to us about it, and there's networking opportunities. So because there are University of Minnesota librarians who go to HSLM, and then they have a lot of them are active in the MLA, sort of the larger organizations. So I sort of feel like if you're networking in HSLM, you're sort of networking beyond that as well. So yeah, I definitely would encourage that.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Reach out to your local connections, and they can help you reach out to a broader community as you need it. If you're moving to Missouri or somewhere,
Definitely.
they'll know somebody there.
Yep.
That's good. But the Special Library Association, which I think probably has some kind of medical subchapter. But at Minnesota Library Association, where you would meet, those are not high on your radar. It doesn't sound like. More specialized.
I looked into SLA, and it seems like I'm not sure that they have a medical library chapter or section, but It's
anymore?
mostly business, I felt, and law library and business library. And HSLM in the Midwest chapter of MLA really kind of that was all I kind of needed to make sure I was doing my continuing education and
Mhm.
making sure I was making connections as well.
Okay. So, what about some of the other things that we see libraries using? Social media being one. Does your library participate in social media at all? No? I see lots of heads shaking.
Yeah,
We
it's
tried
something
it.
yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
something I missed when I used to work in a college library. It was like, get the kids in, like make it exciting and fun. And that's not an aspect at all at my medical library.
No?
And the feedback I get is that physicians and nurses are strapped for time so much. They really don't have time.
Mhm.
I thought I was doing a really cool thing. I did a scavenger hunt for my library page when I first started, and I thought this is going to be really cool. And there was a prize and everything. And the person who won was somebody who worked in environmental services because they had the time.
Yeah.
The scavenger hunt. It was not the nurses and physicians that I was targeting because they just don't have the time.
They don't have the time.
So
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, we tried a little bit of social networking, and a lot of the platforms, nobody really had time, and it was often a trying way to get more engagement in our library, but we realized it was just fizzling out based upon their workload and what they had to offer. But it was
There's a lot
nice to
of
know.
there's a lot of regulations too, like Mayo Clinic,
Oh, sure.
and then also like health, privacy, HIPAA, that kind of stuff. It's just like don't even don't share.
even tip your toe into that.
Mm-mm,
It was enough to scare us off the social media platforms too.
yeah.
Well, you're probably safer in many ways. But
And
what
just
are
having
some?
to come up with content,
Yeah.
you don't want to put it up and then have it languish. So
Mhm.
just the thought of having to come up with content was kind of overwhelming.
And we don't do programming like at my other jobs like that. So content would be hard.
Content would be hard. And the other promotional methods that you use, what are they? I mean, how do you make sure people do know about your library and the library services? Andrew?
That's always been a challenge. Promotion and getting the word out there through leaders. We do have newsletters that occasionally go out. However, that is also every time we try and put out something to our media, our internal media news stories, it always seems to be pared down. So we do have some ways to reach out. It's the old school way of emailing my contacts throughout the organization. That's why we want to develop relationships. Hey, did you hear about this new resource? Or hey, did you know that we are here to provide this service for you? It has the reminiscent feel of just rubbing elbows with the people at certain levels. So that seems to be the best way for us.
So one-on-one, or if possible, newsletters.
Yep. But newsletters have a mixed bag.
That's the same thing about time, I suppose.
That too.
Both creating them, but also
Reading.
finding the audience that has the time to read them.
Exactly.
So other ideas from you, Susan, on promotion of your library services, how to get people?
Yeah, word of mouth is really effective. And I have to be honest, I'm really busy. And so I'm not promoting like super duper duper just because I'm afraid I'd be overwhelmed.
True.
But we are trying to, I think one of the things that the pandemic did was actually made me look at the library presence on our intranet a little differently. And so I'm really going to try to, in this next year, re-engineer or redesign our web page so that it's like even embedding like quick tutorial videos or something, just so that It's a little easier for people to find us. It's a little easier for people to find the resources. So that's kind of how I work. And we have champions, and I'm really, really thankful for the supervisors that I have had who realize that the library is really important. And there have been a few places that I've been able to embed myself, that people know about me, and they keep, a new person will come on, and I will orient them. And so there are little ways that I make inroads, but I mean, to do a big sort of flashy something would really kind of scare me, like,
You don't want
everybody's gonna
everybody
know.
to use the library. Not all at the same time, anyway.
Yeah, right.
Any thoughts on this, Erica?
Yeah, when we have big announcements, we post it on our internal website for the entire institution. But like I said, things move really slowly, so there's not usually a lot of announcements. When it comes to COVID, that was the main thing, but we have such a steady, heavily used spaces, and our patrons just need us. So it's just, we don't really have to do advertising really. And like, we never announced that we were open. We just unlocked the doors and
there they
the
were.
space filled up. Yeah. So we don't really do any.
Those people who went by and tried the doors every day.
Yep. A very determined patron group. So we do have some outreach librarians that connect with the med school, get them in, or onboarding processes to kind of insert ourselves there, but it's not a lot.
So orientation to the library, or a piece of their orientation, includes the library.
Yeah.
Because Susan mentioned teaching, and orientation, I think, do you do tutorials on how to find information, or tutorials on a specific aspect of a database, or is that somebody else's job? Or it just doesn't happen because there's no time?
At Mayo, if a physician wants to do a systematic review of a massive search, they do have to go through a mini orientation from the reference librarian first to be like, are you sure this is what you want? Like, is this what you really are asking for? So they do kind of an orientation.
It's going to take hours.
You realize, and years. And so they do some of that. We do have some FAQs, lib guides, that kind of deal.
Okay,
but it's not frequent, because we do a lot of the searching for them too.
Right,
so
you really are
less instructional.
Yeah. Andrew?
Sure. We love the opportunity to get in front of our audiences. We always say, hey, do you have 10 minutes of your time in the beginning of a meeting? I know you guys are busy. We will relish and take every opportunity we possibly can. We used to do orientations more in depth about, here's our page, this is where you go for these questions for you new nurses. This orientation will help you find where we are, how to request articles or lit searches, and how to use this particular database. And if you have any questions, here's where we are. At least we wanted to present to them those straightforward facts, where to find us and how to get requests from us. Once in a while, we do get more in-depth presentations. We sometimes are able to get in front of the new residents, where we present how to do literature searches. But then again, it comes down to the basics, where to find us, because we find that they're working 17 or 18-hour work days, and they're very busy. They can't do a search themselves. Mm-hmm. But we would love actually to do LibGuides. I'm afraid that's just not within our grasp yet because of some technical remote services aspects. It's a third-party resource that may not work exactly right with our intranet sites. But most of the time, the work that we love is more personal, one-on-one contact. It's been not as frequent, not as requested now due to the pandemic, but every chance we can get, we would love brief presentations about here we are, this is what we can do, and here's how to find us.
Okay. Susan?
Yeah, I do classes. I try to do them about once a quarter. So, and I kind of rotate through. I'll do sort of this is CINAHL, this is Medline, this is PubMed, and this is how you can do a quick search. And then I'll do another class on more advanced, like creating those searches that run every now and then, or creating files, or doing table of contents alerts. So I have done those, although I've noticed in the last few years that my audience is becoming much more savvy as far as searching. And when I first started, a lot of nurses didn't know what CINAHL was. They didn't know how to evaluate information, or they just hadn't been taught. But I'm noticing now that the nurses that are coming in, they have those skills. They're getting that in undergraduate now, for sure. Yeah,
So that nursing school has expanded there.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And we work with the nursing students, and they come in pretty well prepared now. So I think for me, one of the things that I'd like to branch off into is like bibliographic management databases and things, because we have really, CentraCare has really been encouraging the nurses to do research and write. And so I'm getting a lot of like reference lists that they want me to put in MLA or your APA. So
so here use whatever those are called.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the high school ones.
Yeah. So I know APA pretty well, but I think might be something that would be helpful for the nurses to use.
Well, and just teaching them how to manage their big research projects and all the data that comes with that, as well as the supporting resources.
Right.
I think academic libraries have really expanded into that area of helping professors and students, graduate students, manage their research. So there might be some information out there to help develop some of that. So that sounds good. Some teaching, not a lot. Depends on the day, depends on the individual person that needs the help. I suppose not everybody's receptive to the one-on-one tutorial either. It's more just, please get it for me, would you?
It's easier.
Easier. So you must have had some idea of what you were signing up for when you decided you were going to be a medical librarian. But tell us if there's something that really surprised you once you'd been there for a while or been in the job for a while. So how about you, Susan? What surprised you most about your job, or was noticeably unexpected?
Right. Well, one thing was I came from an academic background where sharing information was like water, like you just did it. And then coming into a medical organization, it was really interesting how information is much more curated, much more they're much more careful about sharing information. So when I came in with these ideas about, hey, let's do this from an academic library standpoint, I got a lot of pushback from IT. And I had, if I wanted to do anything that was outside of our firewall, I had to go to an IT committee and make my case. So there were a few times that I was presenting to, 8 people from the IT department on why we needed to have an A to Z URL, a way to consolidate, or not consolidate, but
Shorten,
what's that?
to shorten a URL or?
No, not to shorten it. When you do the A to Z list, I'm forgetting the word, but instead of having to go to each database to find what you're
Oh,
looking
sure.
for, a consolidator.
Consolidated search.
Yeah. So
Discovery layer.
yeah, just little things like that to me in an academic library is like, yeah, of course, because you want people to find information as quickly and easily as they can. But it was really different. The culture was very different in the hospital.
Interesting. So how about you, Erica? What was the big surprise when you got to Mayo?
Well, Mayo in itself is a culture shock. Like, they have their own terminology for getting from one building to the next, so for me, it was the work culture of Mayo Clinic. That was the most shocking. But in medical libraries, because I also came from academic library, I was pretty surprised that my position as access services manager translated really well from academia and from public libraries, that my skills were easily adaptable to any library. No matter what, I'm doing the same thing. I'm connecting the patron to the resource as fast as possible, easy, improving services and that kind of stuff. So that was actually a really good surprise.
That is
for
a good
me.
surprise.
The other thing, like I mentioned before, is the hierarchy stuff. That was shocking to me. So still getting over that. 2 years and I'm still getting
well, I
used
think
to it.
so. Plus, how everybody's identified by what they wear. That used to be more true in lots of big organizations than it is now. But at Mayo, you can tell whose job is what color their scrubs are.
Yep.
Which I think is interesting. And just the rigid dress code that the professionals, medical professionals,
very professional compared to coming from a college library where it was just the college kids, that kind of deal. It was.
Well, and even the professors are different in a college than the medical staff is at Mayo.
Yeah.
So and finding your way around Mayo, that'd be half the battle right there. First time you didn't get lost, that would be a surprise.
Yes. Been lost many times.
Any big surprises for you, Andrew?
Susan mentioned the IT. We have information services, and we still bang our heads against the wall with their logistics and security aspects that they, of course, want to keep things behind the firewall, whereas we're more oriented towards access and sharing. So that did indeed come at a times where it was inconvenient, or worse, a major hindrance for the work that we do. But I guess the most shocking thing, it comes to all librarians perhaps once in a while, and it's where the stereotypical feature just comes and rears its ugly head. And they're usually the people who don't know what we do or what we provide. There have been meetings where I was overlooked or ignored, or even worse, a comment comes across, "Oh, you must love to read. It must be nice." And, you mentioned that earlier in this panelist, Anne. But it's hard not to roll your eyes and give it, let that sink in. But I really try and take it as an opportunity to say, we're here to provide a service. Without us, you may not get the best things from up to date. Without that, the prices will skyrocket. Or do you know that little thing at the bottom of the print of that New England Journal article that you just printed out? It says access provided by library services. Look at that.
That's right. And information is not free.
Exactly. So we want to make sure they have the best tools to provide patient care. And I don't want to make it into another elevator speech, but that it's a bit of struggle. It does happen where those comments do come up every blue moon.
So in the broader medical library community, and particularly in Minnesota, would you say that most of the big medical systems, whether it's whatever they call Fairview now, M Health Fairview or Health Partners, which operates clinics or whatever, do they all have library staff or access to libraries somehow? I mean, hospital libraries,
I believe so.
and the VA has a library, which is obviously a big medical and research center. I know they have, I've been to their library. But because I remember a while back when I was on the Minitex Policy Advisory Council, there was a proposal that came from the University of Minnesota Biomedical Library that a group of clinical databases be added to ELM, because their assumption was that many, many practitioners did not have access to these. Would that be your experience as well? I mean, my experience
Yes.
now is everybody belongs to something bigger than themselves as far as a medical practice. My primary care went from being independent to now University of Minnesota Fairview.
Mhm.
I definitely think that's the trend that, I mean, you don't have that many standalone hospitals anymore.
Right.
Part of a system. And as we've expanded, as St. Cloud Hospital became Central Care, all of the resources that we have also reached out to all of those new hospitals and clinics,
Mm-hmm.
which has huge implications for cost.
I suppose for
a few-
licensing.
Yeah, a few years ago from when we went from one hospital to all of these rural hospital, like 25-bed hospitals, my subscriptions tripled and quadrupled in price. But I knew that I wasn't going to have the same amount of usage to justify that increase. So I remember when they did that, when they were looking at that, and it made me, I have to say, it made me a little nervous, because I thought, well, what if we get these resources and then for some reason the state decides not, that they don't
Right.
wanna,
Fund it
fund it
again.
anymore, and then I don't, CINAHL was one of the databases that was in there, and I thought, well, if I drop it to get it through ELM and then they don't fund it anymore, that's going to be really hard to recoup that line item in my
Mhm.
budget. So it made me a little nervous. I mean, great for, those rural clinics that are out there that don't have access, but I really feel like, and I could be wrong about this, but I do feel like that the systems have expanded, and with them, the resources
Mhm.
also.
That's what I was when that was for the questions I was asking. Just who doesn't, through a larger system, have access? I mean, there are not very many standalone rural doctor's offices anymore.
Mhm.
I mean, even in the tiny Iowa town my mother lives in, they're part of some big system. And, they're one of those 20-bed hospitals, but they have access to everything they need, and a lot of it is telecommunication these days. So it was just, and I don't think that idea has gone much farther. And I suppose some of it might be that the doctors or nurses in these smaller organizations don't even know they have access to you, whether it's Alina or Centricare or the Mayo Health System either. So, anyway, just curious, because that was a big deal there for a while. But now everybody's a member of something, or more than one something.
Yeah, the landscape has drastically changed. The remote access is a highly contested issue, and I would say, yeah, we constantly have to put out the message to the newest recruits within our hospital systems. Yeah, did you know you are now a part of our system? You now have access to all of the resources that people in our regional hospitals do. But yeah, there's a good amount of hospital closures. Doctors' offices they have to comply by new medical database or new what do you call it, EMRs, so
Medical records.
medical records databases. There's a new law with the ACA. It's a huge political landscape that I don't pretend that I can scratch the surface about.
Interesting. Erica, any thoughts on this? No,
Not anything
just
added.
curious.
Yeah.
Well, we're headed towards the end of our time, but of course we always have more questions so we have time to ask. But is there one thing, or is there anything that you did not learn in library school that you wish you had learned? What would that be? Get a lot of interesting answers with this question from our panelists.
Well, I'll start from
Oh, thanks,
from
Susan.
from jobs that I've had in the past. I realized I had no supervisory experience, and that my first experience was not a good one.
Oh,
Yeah, so I actually co-wrote an article with someone about it, that it's not something that you're taught in library school, but it sure would be nice if you got a taste of it. Or there was one class on managerial skills or supervising skills, budgeting skills, running figuring out how to do a budget. So
Thank you
so I think
much.
just those
Did we get
things,
Papa John?
how to run a library.
how to run a library.
Yeah.
That seems kind of key.
I know.
Anything,
Very
Erica,
soon.
that you wish you'd learned in library school?
Yeah, I think more. I took one managing class, and that was it. But I had really good examples when I was a student worker of supervisory that was
That's helpful.
successful.
Mhm.
And I've also had terrible ones. So you learn a lot from the ones that are also
From
terrible.
being supervised.
Yeah. So yeah, I would agree with Susan with that they don't talk much about that in library school. I mean, one class and you're done kind of deal. But
Mhm.
I really appreciated in library school. I took random classes. I didn't do a pathway, which has been really
Okay.
helpful for me as someone who's been in several different types of libraries. So just kind of dipping your toes in that.
Andrew, anything that you didn't learn in library school that you wish you did?
Oh boy. The biggest thing that comes up is managing contracts. I
Oh,
suppose
interesting.
it's a constant negotiation with the vendors about pricing. We have to look back at statistics for how often is this particular publication used, who's the audience, who's it going to, despite the fact that it's cost maybe thousands and thousands of dollars. The articles are maybe just a few cents per each. And you have to be almost a lawyer to read the fine print. There's stuff I know my manager has missed, and you got to be sure to have everything crossed. Every contract is noted very, very carefully. That can be not only time consuming, but managing all the spreadsheets with the vendors, not an easy task. It took some management classes, but this doesn't answer anything close to that.
Interesting how that idea of those managerial skills, which are touched on in the one class that apparently everybody takes in library school, but that the real, whether it's managing budgets, managing contracts, managing people, does tend to be, you have to learn it on the job to some extent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, and it's hard to think how that would change in a library school setting. I mean, that was true when I was in library school back before there were such things as databases and vendor contracts. So that wouldn't have entered anyone's mind. So interesting. So we're going to wrap it up here, but there's one last question. You can either tell us anything you wanted to add that we haven't discussed, or you can tell us that one great story you tell everybody about your library career. What was outstanding? It can be funny, it can be silly, it can be shocking, it can be anything. So sort of panelist choice here. Tell us something we haven't talked about, or tell us a great story that you could use to regale your family, friends, neighbors. What do you think, Susan?
I really don't have one specific thing that has ever happened. But I'm not sure if the audience is people who are thinking about being a librarian or
I think both.
but I have had a really interesting career as a librarian, and it's not anything I would have thought that I would do. I mean, I wanted to be a foreign service officer.
Oh,
And I took the foreign service test and quickly realized that I needed to find a different career path. So, and I mean, just the variety of different libraries I've worked in has been really a lot of fun. So for me, it's not one specific thing, but it's just a really interesting path when I look back, you know, large academic libraries, small specialized libraries, public libraries, academic libraries, and it's been a lot of fun.
great. Stories, Erica?
Oh, that's a hard question for me.
Doesn't have to be.
I'm like, it goes blank, so I don't think of anything. But the thing I did think of that I would want to add is just like Susan's experience going from academic to medical and other specialized libraries. For me, the biggest difference going from academic to medical was in the university library I was at. There was no budget for anything, so you had to be as resourceful as possible.
Oh.
And there are a lot of layoffs at the institution I was at. And so you would have one job, and then the next time you come to work, you were 4 people's positions into one. There was just constant staff turnover, that kind of thing. And then I came to this medical library, and it's like, you ask for something and you get it, and there's a budget for all this, and there's money. And it was just really shocking. Even my experience in public libraries, like, just budgets were tight, and there's not room for that. So that was the most shocking thing coming to a medical library is
Interesting.
the
And a big
budget is
medical and a
huge.
big system.
Yeah, it's huge. So yeah, I was used to like, you want a new chair, duct tape it together. And then this time you're like, you want a chair? Sure, have your pick. And so it's so weird. So weird.
And
to
it'll
work in
be
a
here
library that
tomorrow.
yeah. Yeah. So weird. So.
That's an interesting approach or observation. How about you, Andrew? Something to
boy.
add or a great story?
I don't have any particular stories or instances. Just maybe I'll add a little bit of maybe it's just a recap about. I think most of us, at least my colleagues, and what I've heard in the greater medical librarian world is we're kind of accidental librarians. We never intended to show up in a medical library or a health science library. Most of us major in humanities in our undergrads, I think,
Oh.
and we have no science backgrounds, so it's on the job learning, which is great, but at the same time, it's a steep learning curve. Once we get to our library, I think the majority of us are very, very satisfied. In my library in particular, I like to think we are the best open secret in our organization. We've been compared to the speedy service of Jimmy John's for article requests. And
freaky fast.
Exactly. Maybe I'm hungry too. But for the other part is some leaders think we have an indispensable role. Sometimes they don't feel quite right making an organizational decision without consulting us first, and that is like,
What?
oh, that's great. That is great. At the same time, I would hope that they would be more. I hope they would do it more often. The evidence shows that they are not always so eager to please. Maybe they're just saying that out in the open or sharing that as an anecdote, but it's flattering nevertheless.
Great. Well, this, as always, has been really fascinating. Always for me, I always learn a lot. It's nice to meet new people, but I know the audience really appreciates how open you are in sharing your experiences and history. So thank you very much. And it's 6:01, so I will end this meeting and hope in the future we meet face to face and that we
Wonderful.
recognize you.
We don't have masks on.
Because you'll be human
That's true.
sized as opposed to
Right.
being on a screen, you know,
Yeah.
but you might be wearing a mask, so that could be a barrier. But
Yeah.
anyway, thanks again. We really do appreciate your willingness to participate and invite you to come listen to what other people have to say at future panels. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.